Hello. Today I'll be talking about how I make my apps go from zero to production ready. I'll be talking about how I start from scaffolding the project to setting up the database and the ORM to setting up authentication and the various small libraries that I use inside my application. And now, since I'm primarily a web application developer, I'll be building a web application in this video as well, this walkthrough as well. The application that we'll be building together will be an e-commerce application in which the admins can upload photos and product details, and other users, normal users who have logged in, provided that they logged in, can buy the products. Now, we won't be using Stripe or any other payment provider because I'll just complicate this whole process, and that's not the point of this whole video. The point is for you to learn how to make full stack web applications at lightning speed. That's what this video is all about. Now, I know that the stack that I'll be choosing in this video is something very similar to the T3 stack, but that is the primary gold standard that the T3 stack, that the T3 folks have adopted. But in this video, I want to primarily show you to actually scaffold your project independently. That is without using any external dependencies. Because I remember the last time Next.js had a major update. That is, they introduced the app router. T3 stack, it took a really long time to get up to speed with the app router, something around like 5-6 months. So in this video, I want to show you how you can independently scaffold your projects and get started from making your apps go from zero to production ready. We'll be starting by first scaffolding the project. I'll be using PNPM as my package manager as always, and I'll be using Next.js as the primary meta React framework for this project. What do I want my app to be named? Let's call it XX for exchanges, because that's exactly what you're doing in e-commerce, right? You're exchanging money for some product, so XX, sure. Would you like to use TypeScript? Of course, always use TypeScript whenever you can. I would like to use ESLint, Tailwind. I'm not usually a fan of the source directory, and of course this is a personal preference, so I don't prefer the source directory at all. The app router, definitely will be using the app router. I want to customize the default import alias. Now if you notice something, we don't actually have Prettier inside the project. So it's a good idea to have Prettier because it takes care of all the formatting for you. So let's go ahead and install Prettier first. This is the command to install Prettier, so I'll be using that. Now, since we are using Prettier, it's also a good idea to disable the ESLint rules that conflict with Prettier. So for that, we'll be using the ESLint config Prettier package, and that needs to be extended inside the ESLint.ESLint file. For this project, I'll be using WebStorm as my default editor, IDE. You can use whatever you prefer, doesn't really matter. So this is what my updated ESLint config will be looking like. Another important Prettier plugin that you should install is the automatic class sorting for Tailwind classes. This is very useful when you're using Tailwind inside your project and you want all your class names to be sorted using the Tailwind magic. So like you can see over here, before it's randomly written, all the class names. Over here, there's some logic to what they're using to sort the class names. So that's why I'll be using this. It's very convenient and makes reading the class names very easy. And this needs to be extended inside the .prettierrc file. So that's what we'll be doing, just like that. And this is a good stage for us to actually commit our project now. Once we have installed all the ESLint packages and the Prettier packages, right now is where I feel comfortable making the initial commit of my project. I'll be running the development script now to see how the application is looking, and it's running on port 3000, which is expected. Typical Next.js projects. Let's get rid of all the unnecessary divs and pages that are inside the application right now. So I'll be getting rid of this main and putting in my own main. Hi. And I guess that's it for now. So before we even get started implementing any logic or writing our own components, I think it's important for us to actually install the most famous UI library that's out there. That is the Shadcn library. Installation, Next.js, PNPM. Yes. Now I really love Shadcn because once the installation process is done, you don't need to actually worry too much about anything else. You can basically just take ready-made components, very highly accessible, and style them according to your own needs, and then use them directly inside your application. So that's what makes Shadcn really cool. We'll be going with the New York style. I just prefer the New York style. And just like that, Shadcn has been initialized inside our project. Now in this application, we won't be focusing too much on the styling. I mean, of course, we'll make sure that the styles look good, pretty much good, but we won't be focusing too much on them. We'll right now just want to make sure that we understand how to make our applications and how to take them to the production environments. A neat trick inside the package.json dev script that we can do is that instead of just using next dev, what we can do is that we can use next dev turbo. And what this will do is that it will increase our development script speed insanely. That is, every time we make a change, we don't have to wait like as long as we have to inside a standard next dev script. And the turbo actually just increases the speed of our development script. So for that, we'll have to restart our development script again. Let's do that. Yeah, next dev turbo. And we are running the development script in turbo mode now. This should theoretically increase the speed by a lot. Let's set up the GitHub repository for our project, XX. And now we'll be pushing our app to this repository. Great. Now another thing that I like to do is that once I have my GitHub repository set up, I like to link this to my Vercel deployment cycle so that every time I push any commits to this repository, it automatically builds and updates my production environment. I'll be importing a GitHub repository simply, and it knows that it's a Next.js project, and I'll be simply deploying it because I don't have any specific environment variables right now. And just like that, I already have my project deployed. After your Vercel deployment is successful, you'll be seeing a small tick over here that will indicate that your deployment was successful and everything's working fine on Vercel. So keep an eye out on this tick or cross whenever you see it on your GitHub repository. Now let's get started by setting up our database and the ORM. Now the ORM that I prefer to use is Drizzle ORM. Drizzle ORM is just so good. It has amazing TypeScript support and it is very intuitive to write schemas inside Drizzle ORM. If you know SQL already, then Drizzle will feel like sort of a wrapper, a very thin wrapper on top of SQL made for TypeScript, and you'll just fall in love with it like I have already. The database that we'll be using will be a Postgres database, a Postgres SQL database, because in this case, we want our user to have relationships with the product that they are creating, right? Or even the product that they are buying. And now I have always preached about SQL databases being much more superior to normal non-SQL databases in most of the use cases. So we'll be seeing how we can create our own schemas inside a Postgres database using Drizzle, and how we can push those changes to our hosted database, that is the Neon database. Once the installation is complete, we'll be setting up the database files inside our project. So for that, what I prefer is that I have a lib folder that is already over here, and inside that I have something known as DB, and that DB contains all my logic for my database. Lib is usually used when you want to use something. Now the lib folder is used usually when you want to prepare something inside your application that you're getting from an external library. So here we'll be copying over our code from the Drizzle docs itself, and yep, just like that we have our setup ready. So this is what my Neon console currently looks like. A really neat trick inside Neon is that you can actually just create a new database, name it, and we'll be calling it XX. And now you can use this database inside your project. So technically you can have a single instance of the Postgres running, and inside that you can have multiple databases which you can use across multiple projects without thinking about schema collision or anything of that sort. Let's create it, and we'll be going for the pooled connection. Now the reason for going behind the pooled connection is that it's just much better than a single connection in my opinion for our use case, which is that we always want our connections to be pooled. That is, we want a pool of connections to be available, and we don't want the connection to be closed after every request that has been performed. We want the connection to be kept open and a pool of connections to be maintained, so that if any user is requesting something from the database, he gets that instantly from the pool of connections available. Now what you'll want to do is that you will want to copy this connection string and head over to your Next.js project. Over here we'll be creating a .env file which will have our database URL. But a tiny thing that we can improve over here is by, instead of using the process.env to get our database URL, because over here you can see that I've entered the wrong key over here. It is not drizzle underscore database URL. It is just database underscore URL. So how can we prevent all these errors from popping up? Well, the thing that we can use is something known as, again from the T3 folks, so kudos to them. It is a T3 Env package that is very useful in this situation. Now we'll be using T3 Env for parsing through our environment variables and making sure that they are type safe. That is, they actually exist. I've already made a video covering about T3 Env, so you can go ahead and check that out. In this case, I'll just be implementing whatever they have. So let's go ahead and download the dependencies, and then let's create a env.ts file. This should also technically be inside the lib folder because as I said, the lib folder is used for preparing different packages that we already have. So we'll be using the lib folder for this case as well. And now we'll be using this env constant to parse and verify whether we have environment variables and then use them inside our application. So we'll be seeing how we can do that. It's very straightforward. Env. And instead of process.env, we'll be using env.database URL. And do you see that? We get auto completion as well because of TypeScript. Database URL. Perfect. This is what I'll be doing. Now another thing that we should add over here is validate schema on build. So anytime we don't have the environment variable, whenever we are building our Next.js application, it will throw us an error stating that we don't have a specific environment variable. Now this is very useful in the case where you have deployed your application that like we have on Vercel, and we haven't provided Vercel with the appropriate environment variables. So this will actually refuse from building on Vercel and throw us an error with a very good error message stating that we don't have that specific environment variable. Let's go ahead and install the GT package, and then we'll be copying this over in our Next.js config file. And this is all that we need to validate our schema, that is validate our environment variables on build. That's it. Now let's push this to GitHub. Now since I have not added my environment variables on Vercel, this build is going to fail on Vercel. Let's check it out. Vercel. So if I inspect this deployment, I can see that I get an error over here. Let's see what the error is. Error, invalid environment variables. I don't have the valid environment variables, and that's why it's throwing this error. Perfect. I know that I have probably missed out something. And it states clearly which environment variable I've missed. That is the database URL, which is a required environment variable. Alright, so far we have seen how we can deploy our application to Vercel. We've seen how we can set up a database using Neon, a Postgres database using Neon. And then we have also ensured that all our environment variables ever will always be type safe, and we can ensure that they are correct even on build. Now let's go ahead and make a form that we'll be using to add products. So for building a form, first off, we'll create a new route. It will be called user/products page.tsx. So page.tsx is where we'll be hosting our page, and user/products is the route. Now if you want to see that, we can do something like this. Great. So let's start by adding the product form now. The add product form will be a different component because I just like separation of concerns. And the product form, the add product form will be a form which will be accepting only the name, and that's it. We'll only be displaying the name and the description of the product as well. So let's create a very simplistic form for now, and we will be using actions later. For that, let's go ahead and install the input and the label from Shadcn. That's the UI component that we'll be using inside our product. And let's import the add product form inside our add product page. Perfect. Looking nice. Let's make a few UI changes over here. So first off, we'll want this page to be wrapped inside a main always, because that'll be the main content. Then we'll want some type of h1 or h2 to be given to add product. So let's see what Shadcn has for that. We'll be using a typography from Shadcn. And I think h2 looks pretty good for that. So we'll just be copying the code for h2. As you can guess, I love copy pasting. Looking good. Now we can add some classes to our form as well. Let's go by first margin top. We want it to be really far from the header. Yeah, looking better. We'll probably give it the container class as well. Better. We're getting there. And now another thing that we need to add inside our form is of course the submit button, which will be a button. Now this button is again coming from Shadcn. So any component that you see over here is most likely coming from Shadcn, and it's going to be a type submit button. Let's give it a flex class as well, and a gap of 2, and flex call, because we want them to be in a column. And I think gap 2 is a little less, so how about gap 5? Yeah, better. And I want this to only occupy a limited class. I want the width of the button to be very limited, so that's what I'll be going for. Yeah. Alright, not bad. And now let's instead of email address, I want the name, placeholder, product name, and similarly we'll be going for description. Describe your product. And let's give it a class name of margin top sum2, and similarly we'll be giving it to the name input field as well. And let's increase the gap to say 7. Yeah, I like the look of this form already. How is this page looking? I mean, it's decent. Since the focus of our application is not really UI, we won't be focusing too much on it, but I mean, it should look decent enough. Great. Now we can go ahead and play around with server actions. Now server actions have become stable in Next 14, and that's the version of Next.js that I'm using. So let's go ahead and add that. We'll be creating a new submit action, which will for now only be console logging create. And notice that I have this use server directive on top of my submit action folder. So create. And let's see how it's looking like. So create. And now there was a post request made to my user products endpoint. That is my server action. And how can I prove that? I'm getting a log on my server. So it's working. Alright, now that we have created a basic form, we'll be seeing how we can use Zod to validate the input that we are receiving on our submit action. That is on our server action. So first up, we'll be creating a schema. That will be the form schema, which will look something like a Zod object. Which will have two parameters. The name and the description. Now we want the name to be a minimum of 2 characters. And if it isn't, then we want it to be that the name should be at least 2 characters long. And similarly, we want the description to be a minimum of 10 length. So we want the description to be a minimum of 10 characters. And similarly, we'll be throwing a message over here that the description should be at least 10 characters long. Now that our form schema is ready, what we'll be doing is that we know that we'll be receiving a form data by default over here. And we'll be parsing this form data using Zod. So what we'll be doing is that we'll be parsing this data the form data using the form schema parse method. Now, once the form data has been parsed using the form schema, we are sure that it contains the name and description of the exact types that we want. That is, it is a string and the minimum length of 2 and 10 for the name and description respectively. Now, parse will throw an error if there is a validation error inside the form data. So we'll need to wrap it around a try catch block like so. And then inside the catch block, if we have an instance of a Zod error, then we'll be returning the Zod error simply like that using this. And if it is not a Zod error, then we'll simply be returning a normal error message like so. And let's go ahead and log the name and description. Now let's see what this actually means on our client side. So let's add a name and description. And what do we get? We don't get anything on the terminal where it should be printed. All right, so I think the error that I made over here is that instead of form data, I should probably pass in the name directly and the description directly from the form data rather than passing in the whole form data. And another mistake that I made, that I did not name my inputs. So my server action has no idea where I'm getting the name and description from. So let's add the name as name, and similarly the name of the input of description as description. Yeah, this should work now. Creating product with name and description. Nice. Let's name it something else so that we don't have confusion. Let's name it Jiki Wiki TG. And let's name it lol. Now what do we get? Yep, creating product and description. Perfect. All right. Now, another thing that you must notice over here is that we are not passing in any user ID at the moment. That is, we are not sure which user ID is actually creating this product. So how can we do that? So the way to pass in additional arguments inside the server action is by using something known as bind. Now, bind is a way through which we can bind an additional argument without actually calling the function. So this new function that we'll be creating, that is the create with user ID. Now this function will already contain the user ID as an argument in it. Create is what we'll be using to bind it, and we'll be passing in any user ID for now. We'll just be calling it user1, and then you can use this create with user ID instead of our normal create action. Now, of course, we'll have to accept this over here as user ID, which will be a string. And now if we try seeing what this is, so this is the user ID. Let's check it out again. Product, long ass description, create, and I have my user ID and the product and description along with it. So just by binding our create server action method, we can pass in user ID or even other additional arguments which we would like to pass on to the server action. Another approach to this is by adding a hidden input field. But I feel like this is a little unsafe because anyone can just go through your app and read the user ID just by inspecting your HTML. So I think bind is much better in that it does not provide it, in that it encodes the arguments that it receives. So it's much better in that case. Great. Now that we can do all this, I think now is the right time to add in authentication and then go ahead and create some database schemas. Now for authentication, we'll be using the latest Next-Auth version, that is the Next-Auth version 5. Previously, the documentation for Next-Auth was found on the Next-Auth website. As you can see over here, Next-Auth version 4, but from the latest version, that is the version 5 and upwards, they have migrated everything to Auth.js, which is their new branded website. So that's where I have come for documentation, and then we'll be adding in the Next-Auth beta into our project. So let's go. Once Next-Auth has been installed, we'll simply be following whatever they're saying. Alright, now we'll be setting up the environment, for which we need the auth secret. For now, I'll just create open SSL key for that, which will be this key, and I'll be adding it inside my env.local. So auth secret, which is a required secret from the Next-Auth folks. So I'll be copying this as my secret. And yeah, and I think I should also add this to my env.ts file so that I get an error on my build if it does not exist. After I have my environment set up and I've installed all the packages, we'll be configuring the auth.ts file, which should be placed in the root of the application. So let's go ahead, and then let's go ahead and add a route handler inside our app, which will include something like this. Great. And now we'll have to just set up the authentication method. So for authentication, what I'll be using is, I won't be using the credentials because that is just too much work, and I wouldn't recommend you to ever set up your own credential system because that is just too much of work. So rather, what I would recommend is that go with any of the famous OAuth providers. For example, if you're building some developer-centric website, then you should probably go for GitHub. If you're building a user-centric website which will probably have users from all over the world, then Google or Twitter would probably work fine. So I'll be going for Google because everyone has a Google account these days, so why not? Now the way for you to set up Google authentication, that is a Google OAuth, is to go first to the Google console. We'll be going to the Google console, the Google Cloud console. And over here, what you'll want to do is that you'll have to create a new project. Now we'll be calling our project XX because that is the name of the project. You can name it whatever you want, and create. Now once the project is set up, what we'll be doing is that we'll be heading over to the credentials section, and we'll be creating a new credential. Now this credential is what we will be using for setting up our Google authentication. So what we need is an OAuth client ID. So before we get a OAuth client ID, we need to configure our consent screen. Now the consent screen is where we will be taking a look at what we will be getting from the OAuth provided by Google. So this is an external app, of course, and the app name is XX. And I'll be providing my email ID, and I'll just be copying my support email address again. It'll be the same. Now we'll need to add and remove scopes. So we'll need to basically add scopes. We need the user's email ID and publicly available information like name and profile picture. And that's all that we'll be needing really. So these are non-sensitive scopes. So it's very easy for Google to accept these demands. And yeah, I think this is done now. Now we just need to create a credential now. It's a web application that we'll be creating, and let's name it XX next. And now this is the most important part of setting up your OAuth client. We need to have an authorized JavaScript origin and authorized redirect URIs. So the authorized JavaScript origin, the origin is where we want our application to send requests from. That is what will be used to send requests to the Google client ID, that to the Google client, which will be localhost 3000. And now after this is done, where do we want the user to be redirected after he or she has successfully logged in through Google? So that's what we'll be providing over here. Now we know that is something related to this. We'll just be doing something similar to this, which will look like localhost 3000 API auth callback Google, which is exactly this thing. And the origin for now is just localhost 3000. Later on, we'll be looking at how we'll be taking this to production. But for now, this should work. And now it's very important to copy over the client ID correctly. into our environment variables. This is the client ID and then the client secret. Of course, this is not what they'll be named. We'll have to name them what Auth expects them to be, which is the Auth Google ID, which will be my client ID, and then the Auth Google secret, which will be my client secret. Perfect. And I need to provide this over here inside my auth.ts file as a provider. Now let's go ahead and add it in the sign in button. So it will just be a simple component for now. I'll name it sign in.tsx. And this is what it'll be taking in. And now we can use this inside our root page. That is our home page. See how this is looking like. Sign in with Google. Nice. And just like that, I am able to sign in through Google. Now this setup has been very easy because of Next.Auth. And yeah, perfect. This is working like a charm. Now that authentication is set up, another thing that we should probably do is that we should add all our auth secrets and auth client ID into the env file again, so that we get build errors. The auth Google ID and the auth Google secret. Great. Alright, now that authentication is set up for us, what we want now is a way for our authenticated users to be persisted on our server. That is, we want a record of all our existing users. Now, why is this important? Because anytime a user creates a product, we want to make sure that they have their own user table from which we can get data from the data of the user. Furthermore, we can use this user data to process payments that the user is going to make in the future. And that is why persisting any authenticated users is very important. So how can we do that? Well, for that, we need to update our database schema, which is currently empty because we don't have any database schema. So now we'll be starting to work with the database itself. Let's see how it's looking like. So for that, what we'll be needing is that we'll be needing the Drizzle adapter that Auth.js has. And then we'll be installing all the dependencies. And then we'll need to update our URL to something like this, env. Instead of database URL, it will be auth drizzle URL. And similarly, in the env.ts file, we'll need to update it again to auth drizzle URL. Now, once that is done, we'll be copying over the Postgres schema that they have provided us, because our database is a Postgres database. So where do we add the schema.ts? Well, since we already have the DB set up over here in the lib, it's very easy for us to just go over here, and it makes sense for us to add the schema.ts in the libdb folder. And then we'll need to add this adapter in our auth.ts as well. So adapter, then all the required. Nice. And I think I have not exported the database that I have created over here. So I'll export that. And then I'll be able to parse this. Yes. And similarly, this is not env.database URL anymore. This is the auth drizzle URL. Raptor. Yes. Now all this makes sense now, doesn't it? So I've set up my Drizzle adapter, which will take all my users and add them inside my database. I'll have a users table with the proper ID, name, email, and image. And I can use this users table further inside my app to process any payments that the user is making, or to add products from the user using its user ID, and create relationships between the user table and the product table. Now that our schemas are ready, that we have created so many tables, should we be expecting to see all these tables inside the Neon console where our database is hosted? Well, no, because we haven't yet migrated our tables to the database yet. So how can we do that? For that, what we'll be needing to migrate all our tables inside our schema.ts to the database itself. So for that, what we need to run a Drizzle migrate command. To run migrations, we'll first have to set up the drizzle config.ts file, which will be in the root of our project, and it will contain something very similar to this. Now, instead of the process.env, we'll be using the env.ts file which we have created. So env.ts.auth drizzle URL, and the schemas are inside lib db schema.ts, and it's a Postgres database, and there's the database connection. Yes, perfect. Now the command to run a drizzle kit migrate is drizzle kit migrate. So let's add this inside our package JSON, because this is a script that we'll be using very frequently during development. Migrate, and let's run this migrate command now. So now, before running the pnpm migrate command, we need to first generate the required migrations. So first we'll be running the pnpm drizzle kit generate, which will generate all our migration files. That is the file that are required by Drizzle to migrate all our schemas to the hosted database that we have. pnpm migrate. And now, after all the migrations have happened, now if we see our Neon database, then it will be having a few tables that we have created, like, namely the user, accounts, session. Let's have a look. Yeah, so I have the user account over here. And now if I sign in with Google, once I've signed in, I will be able to see my account in the database persisted. If I refresh this, and here I have my own data, and I have my image as well. So this is my profile picture, my email ID, my name, the ID of my user, my user ID. I have everything over here in my database, thanks to the Drizzle adapter from the Next-Auth folks and the sign-in that Google has provided using its Auth. Alright, now that we have set up our database schema, what we'll be doing is that we'll be adding in more schemas so that we can add products and link those products to the user ID. That is, develop a relationship between the user and the products table. Another thing to keep in mind before you commit your project after this migration of the database is that you should always git ignore the Drizzle folder that will be created automatically. This Drizzle folder contains all your migration details and are not really required to be pushed to GitHub, because anytime someone runs a pnpm drizzle kit migrate, the Drizzle folder is automatically generated for them, so this is not required to be pushed. So we'll go ahead and git ignore this. So let's go ahead and add in the products table as well, which will be holding the name and description for the moment. Products. Now for the column, the first column will be an ID, which will be a UUID for now. So we'll be seeing how we can actually use a UUID. How we can generate a specific ID every time a new product is added automatically. So we'll be using something that Drizzle provides over here, that is the default function. So over here, we'll be setting the ID to not null a primary key and the default function of UUID. Well, in this case, we'll not be using UUID, but rather we'll be using something known as CUID. This is what we'll be using. Let's go ahead and install this, and create ID is what we'll be using. Create ID. And then we'll be importing it now. Yes. Perfect. So now every time a new product is added to the table, a primary key of ID, which is being created by the create ID function, will be created and automatically be assigned to the ID. Let's go ahead and add the name and the description. These are the only two fields that will be required in our products table. Now, another thing that we'll be needing over here is the user ID. That will be the ID of the user who is creating this product. So it will be referencing this users table. Now, how can we reference a different table in this products table using Drizzle? So for that, we'll be using something known as relations. Now, just adding this user's ID is not enough for creating a relationship in Drizzle. Whenever you're creating a relationship in Drizzle, you also need to explicitly mention the relationships. Now, will this be a one-to-one relation or a one-to-many relation or a many-to-many relation? So if you think about it, it will be a one-to-many relation because a single user can create multiple products, but every product will be owned or be controlled. The admin of a single product will always be a single user. So let's go ahead and copy this because this is exactly what we'll be doing over here. We'll be creating the products relations. Products relation, and the user ID that is there inside the products table will be referencing the users.id table, and the field itself will be the products.user ID. Now, another change that we should make is that instead of the default function relying on crypto.random UUID, we should probably change this to create ID just for consistency's sake, right? Because we want each ID to be generated by the CUID package that we have installed. And yeah, this is all that is required for us to create the relationship between the users and the products table. Let's go ahead and migrate this new schema that we have created onto our Neon database that is our hosted Postgres database. So now before running the pnpm migrate command, we need to first generate the required migrations. So first we'll be running the pnpm drizzle kit generate pnpm migrate, and migration was successful. So let's go ahead and see the table now. What does it contain now? There we have it. We have the product data. We have the product table ready. Now, instead of relying on the Neon database, that is the Neon console each time, what we can do is that we can run the Drizzle Kit Studio, which will be a local studio through which is a local GUI through which we can visualize our database very easily. So let's see how we'll be doing that. Drizzle Kit Studio verbose, because we want all the different functions to be written down. pnpm drizzle kit verbose, and now it's up and running on this URL. So let's check this out. What does this look like? And there it is. Over here we can see all the different data that we have, all the different sessions, accounts, products. There are no products right now, so let's go ahead and fix that. Let's use a real user to actually create the product now and push it to the database, that is add the data to the database. Over here, we are not putting any real user ID, if you remember. What we have over here is a random user ID. So how do we get the real user ID over here? Do we even have the user ID? Well, let's find out. So in auth, there is this function, that is the await auth function, that is required to first of all get the authenticated user session. So let's see what that will return us. Before that, we need to make sure that our function is async so that we can await it inside. And let's see what the session actually is. Let's reload this page and check out the session. Nice. So this is what the session includes. It includes the user ID, the name, my email, the image, the token, and a lot of other things. So right now, the thing that is important to us is the user ID. So first off, we'll check if there is no session.user. If there isn't, then we'll return null, which is all right. And now if we get the ID, by session.user.id, and we can pass this over here. And just in case it is empty, we'll pass in a string. Great. Now we are passing in the real ID of the user to our server function, to our server action. And how will we be now using this inside the server action? We'll be using Drizzle to add data to our database. How can we do that? Let's see. Insert. Insert is what we'll be doing over here. So await tb.insert and the values. So over here, instead of logging it, we'll be actually inserting it. Insert into products. Values will be name, the description, and the user ID. And this is all that is required for us to insert the data into our database. Let's check it out. We'll be naming our product mouse, and the description will be simple mouse for PC, and create. Well, we didn't get any response back because we haven't integrated any like toast notifications or any other way through which the user can know that the data has been added to the database. But has the data actually been added to the database? Let's find out. And here it is. We also have the user who added it, the user ID, which is given over here, and the name, the description, the ID of the product itself. And just like that, we were able to insert data into our database very easily. Alright, so a few things that we'll be correcting over here is that instead of having the add product on user products, we'll be having it on user add, which will be the page from which the user can add the product. So we'll be creating it over here, and then we'll be shifting all these pages to add. So now if we search user add, we'll be redirected over here. So what do I want the user products page for then? Well, on this page, I want to list down all the products that the user has created. So that's what I'll be doing over here. For now, I'll be all products, simply. And after the product has successfully been added using the submit action, just before returning it, I'll be redirecting it to user products. And let's check it out now. So if we go ahead and add keyboard for your Zen mode. And after it has been added, I should have been redirected to the user products page, but I guess I was not. Alright, so the reason that I was not redirected is probably because of this thing that I found on Stack Overflow. There's a bug in the try catch block, so I shouldn't be catching any errors whenever I'm trying to redirect. I should rather simply be using this in a finally block if I am using try catch. And to user products. Yes, this is where I want to redirect my user to. And let's add in keyboard for office. Great. Now I should be redirected to the user products. Yes, I am. Now, what do I want to see in this all products page? I want to see all the products that this user, the user that I'm logged in as currently has. So let's see how I'll be doing that. First off, some basic UI changes. This will be all products. Instead of div, this will be a main because I want this to be the main content. Because I want all of this to be inside the main content. And now comes the magic part. I'll be using Drizzle over here to get my data. So I'll be using Drizzle to get all my products. The product is equal to await. Now how can we fetch all the data? So it'll be a select. Now a select is what you've usually seen in SQL, right? But Drizzle provides some better way for you to query all your data. That is using the query method. So we'll be using that, find many. We want to just copy this whole thing. And let's await it over here. Query, and I want to query all the products. Over here in the config, I have to provide a where or a with clause. So I don't want any with. Now what with will do is that it will look for the relations that we have. Now since a user has a relation with the product and the product has a relation with the user, I can fetch the user as well. That is the user data, ID, name, email, everything, along with this single query as well. That is called a join. So using the single command, we can also perform joins. But over here, we just want to perform a where clause, find many. That is, we want to find many products that belong to a single user. So over here, I'll be giving it a where and equal to, something like this, something very similar to this. But instead of hard coding everything, what I'll want is, I'll want this to be products.id. And over here, I'll want to fetch the ID. So what I'll be needing again is the session. Now, how can I get the session? We can get the session like this, the ID of the user like this. That's what we'll be using over here. And you can use the ID over here now. So what this find many function will do is that it will look for all the product IDs and the ID of the user. Okay, I mean, this is wrong a little. This shouldn't be product.id, it should be product.user.id. It will match all the products user ID and the ID itself and return them over here in all products. Now, if you look at all products is an array of all the products that are there in the table that match this criteria right here. And now we can map over all the products. And now on reload, I should be able to see both of my products. That is the mouse and the keyboard that I had created. Now, this is not the most beautiful looking UI, of course, but at least you can see how I'm able to access my data from my database using a React server component. Now what we are doing over here, this query is known as component level data access. This is an alright pattern and you can do this when you're prototyping or building products very fast. But the recommended approach over here is that you have a server folder or whatever folder that is a single file in which you are accessing all your server queries. For example, this is a query which should probably be running only on your server, right? And over here also it's running on the server, which is correct. But it cannot be very well audited, or it cannot be controlled over here that there's no data leaks happening over here. So what's the best thing to do over here? The best thing to do over here is to create a server folder, have a queries file inside it, and over here use something known as server only. So server only is a package. If you look at server only is a package which is recommended by security folks at Next.js. What server only says is that the code that'll be written inside this and wherever it will be exported, that should only run inside a server and nowhere else. So there is no chance ever that this database query can ever be leaked. There's no chance of that ever. And how do I know all this? Well, this is this amazing blog post written by the Next.js security team. over here. And what we were doing currently was the component level data access, which is all right. But what is even better is to use something like this, import server only. And now what we'll want is, we'll want to shift this function to this queries file over here. So something like export function get my products and then return all products. And now I don't have the ID over here. So how can I get the ID? Well, I can actually use this inside my function directly over here. And I can use my get my products to fetch all my products now. And of course, this needs to be awaited. So now let's reload and see what we get over here. And we get the same thing because it is supposed to be the same thing. It's just that it's much well protected now and it can be very easily audited because all my server components will be querying from this file. That is, they'll be using this file to make queries to the database or whatever queries that they are making. And I can very safely audit this and see that there are no leaks in my function. That is, there are no leaks whenever I am sending data to the client or I'm trying to render any component. And we should also probably install the types of server only. There is no such thing. Alright, I guess this is just a ID error, my ID error, so nothing to worry about. So that's it. I mean, we were able to display a basic UI and fetch all the data that is coming from the database. And we also saw the taint, that is the server only security feature that we should be implementing in our applications. And I guess that's it. The project is complete. I mean, it's not very beautiful, sure, but there are a few challenges which you can solve on your own. The first is probably create a landing page. Sure, why not? I mean, there needs to be a landing page, right? Then you can create a product specific page. Actually, let's create the product specific page together. So let's see how we can first of all list down all the products that are available and then click on it and go to the product specific page. So what we'll be doing over here is that instead of the user, we'll be going to products and ID. Product ID. Page.tsx. Now what this product ID in a square bracket does is that it provides me with a param, in the sense that it will be a query parameter, a route parameter that I can access and then use that to whatever I want to do. So I'll be using this to fetch the product directly. Now let's see what I mean by that. So first of all, there will be params over here, and this params will contain my product ID. Great. Let's see what it's looking like. Params.product ID. Let's rename it to product because this is a single product we're talking about. And let's check this out now. We can access this 123 as a dynamic parameter. Now what is this called? This is called dynamic routes in Next.js. Dynamic routes in Next.js. This is exactly what I've used. This is a slug, and I can use the slug inside my application to then query different various products. So this is how you can do it. This is a challenge for you. I'm not going to do it because I've shown you everything how to do it. So I guess you can do it now. A product display, a product description page, or a product description page. Yeah, that suits it. Then probably can you figure out image uploading yourself by using something known as, S3 is fine, but S3 is a little advanced. So you can use something known as upload thing by Theo, who's again from the T3 team. The T3 folks have done just so much work for the web development community. It's insane. Image uploading for the products, and can you display it in the product display page, description page. Then next up, can you make sure that there's a cart on which the users can add different products. Then can you make sure that there is a sort of a user page which has a different layout compared to a normal landing page. That is, we don't want the layout to be same for the user and the landing page. Can you make sure? I'll give you a hint. For this, you'll need something known as route groups. So check out route groups for this in Next.js. Check out route groups inside Next.js. And yeah, I mean, if you are able to do all these things, then you have created a pretty solid e-commerce website. I mean, for the final step, you can probably create checkout, some payment integration like Stripe or something. That will be a killer blow. But yeah, I think I've covered all my basic things that I wanted to cover inside this video. That is deployment, scaffolding the project, setting up the database, setting up authentication, database schemas, and fetching data from the database, React, that is a server-only package, and server actions. So I think I've covered almost everything that I wanted to cover. Yeah, I guess this is it. One thing that you have to keep in mind once you have deploying your project is that after deploying, you will be given a specific URL, right? Like if I go to my Vercel projects, I'll be able to see a specific URL for my project. That is XX Rosie Vercel app. And then what I'll have to do is I'll have to go to my Google console because we are using Google Auth. And inside that, I'll have to add it as a JavaScript origin and I have to add its callback URL as well. So let's see how we can do that. I mean, it's very similar to what we already did with the local host, but this is an important step, so don't miss on this. I'll have to add it over here. I have to provide it the right callback URL, and similarly over here. And now it's saved. Now let's save it. And similarly on the OAuth consent screen, I'll need to add in a trusted domain name. So over here, I have the authorized domain name. It got automatically added from the credentials, which is great. So yeah, and this is it. This was like one of the biggest videos that I've ever made. It was really fun. I shared everything that I knew about starting the project from zero and taking it to production. And this is exactly how I take my applications and products from zero to production. Yeah, I mean, just the fact that we don't need TRPC as much as we needed it before for mutations is just mind-blowing. TRPC still does have its use cases, which we can discuss in some other video. But yeah, that's all for this video. I hope you had a lot of fun, and make sure that you complete the challenges that I've given to you, because they will just take all the knowledge that I've shared with you to a next level. And then you won't probably need to see any other video, but you can probably just start developing your own applications. How cool would that be? All right, that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.